Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, the debt trap. A great article by Josh Mitchell and Michel Martin of NPR. Our question from a listener is part 3 of our trilogy of questions from Diana from Wisconsin. Our interview is with Karen Kristof, the Assistant Vice President and Dean of Admissions of Colorado College, on understanding Colorado College. And our college spotlight will be Colorado College with Karen Kristof.
Dave, you're back in the saddle, man. What's it feel like?
It's great. It's bittersweet. As you know, I'm loving to be back on this Father's Day, but, we're both sort of contemplating the passing of someone near and dear to us, your father and my Uncle Alfred. So we come to you with a solemn, but not a heavy heart.
Yeah, friends, we always try to be authentic and candid with you, and I lost my dad this week. It's a little mixed emotions here because Dave and I often record on Sundays, so we're actually recording on Father's Day. So it'll be my first Father's Day without my dad. And in some ways, it's a tough one because he was such an amazing father that was kind of the quintessential family man. But he's 10 years older than my mom, and so he lived to be 93, and he really lived a really full life. And but it's also I'm also buoyed and I'm encouraged because, and I really mean this, it's really fun doing a podcast with your friends. And, I got the call Wednesday night. I was in a Zoom counseling session with the mom and her daughter. And my mom called me at 10:10. And I said right to the family, I said, my dad's health's not great. My mom doesn't call me this late. I normally wouldn't take a call in the middle of a session, but I need to take this. And of course I got the news, and then I talked to my brother for an hour. And I didn't want to wake my sister up that late, although she was actually with my mom at the time. I didn't really want to disturb her. So Dave was actually the first person I called. I called him at 11:45 p.m. He was incredibly comforting. And then I think Lisa was the third person that I called. And two of the first two people I ended up texting were Susan and Julia. And everybody was so comforting. And I realized, my podcast partners really are my friends. I'm grateful to all of them. They've been such a source of encouragement. But then I had another thought, Dave. I thought, I'm not that superstitious, but gee, since we started the podcast, your dad passed, Lisa's dad passed. Right after Susan came on and did her interview on the personal statement, her dad passed. Are we jinxed or something? Maybe I needed to warn Julia and Vince what they're getting into. So, But no, I think it really just means that we're old. We're old.
Passage of life, my friend.
Passage of life, yeah. So, on a more serious note, I've learned everyone handles grief a little differently. I was talking to my brother Norm yesterday, and we both had the same experience. Wednesday and Thursday, we were fine. And then Friday and Saturday, it hit us. For me, when I see a photo, it just tears well up. And Kara sent me a photo with Dad and I sitting at Cracker Barrel outside, waiting to go in and get our table, and just it just set off some emotions. But another friend of mine recently lost a parent, and they called it a celebration of life. So that's how I'm looking at it. Fly out tomorrow to go back to the south of Toronto area. I'll be there from Monday to Friday, and I'm grateful for his 93 years.
We know the funeral will be coming up this Tuesday, and it will be virtual, and I'll have the pleasure of attending that way. But I just wanted to say a couple things. My Alfred Stucker tribute. Great educator, loving father, faithful husband, dedicated uncle, faithful man of God, and steadfast friend. All of these adjectives describe my Uncle Alfred, who passed away this week at the wonderful age of 93. His passing was in a manner that we should all hope for, peacefully, at home, in his sleep, resting in the arms of his loving wife, passing from earth into heaven straight into the arms of Jesus. It is hard to remember a time when I did not know my Uncle Alfred, or his wife Norma and their 3 children, Mark, Norman, and Kathleen, who I knew so closely growing up, they literally became an extension of our immediate family. From spending birthdays and Christmases together to traveling down in the car to summer camps, sporting events, and Bible conferences, Uncle Alfred and his family was as loved and as close as anyone I can remember. I continue to see my Uncle Alfred every week in the life of his son and my good friend Mark, who carries on his mission of impacting the lives of people through the advancement of education and purpose. Uncle Alfred did it as a high school teacher and administrator, and Mark continues his guidance through being not only a KIP counselor and a counselor through School Match for You, but through his College Bound Kid podcast, which we all know so well, and which now reaches over 20,000 listeners a month, helping families make the right decisions in getting their children in and through the important institutions of college and university. His daughter Kathleen is also a high school teacher, and his son Norman is a successful businessman in the city of Denver. Uncle Alfred, we will miss your humor, your guidance, your love, and your friendship. But if a man's life impact can be measured by those he leaves behind, Uncle Alfred, your legacy is secure in the knowledge that your wife, your 3 wonderful children, and your many wonderful grandchildren will carry on your mission here on earth until we one day join you in heaven. Thank you, Uncle Alfred, for all that you did and what you meant to each and every one of us. Give a hug to my mom and dad, who's with you now, and keep the heavenly station wagon tuned up until we can all take that celestial road trip and hang out with the Apostle Paul. And just remember, Uncle Alfred, I got the front seat. Mark can ride shotgun. Your loving nephew, Dave.
Thank you for that, Dave. That's very, very thoughtful and very well written, and I know heartfelt. And for those of you who are first-time listeners, Dave and I have known each other our whole lives. That's because our parents were friends. And one of the highlights for me was going back to my dad's 90th birthday. And your dad was there. And seeing them together.
That's right.
Just
I remember that.
Sit back and tell stories of what literally is like a 70-year friendship. Yes. It was pretty cool. So that and growing up together, we just called each other cousins. We felt too close to just be friends. So we meet people on the basketball court or tennis courts. Who's that? Oh, this is my cousin. So that's right. A little bit of that's where the Uncle and Alfred comes. But listen, let's talk about it. Let's talk admissions because people came on here to hear that. So yeah, we got a lot to cover today. So admissions tip today is people really underestimate the power of a great question. A great question can completely turn around the perception of a student by an admission officer. So some of you regular listeners know that Susan and I started a national multicultural college fair when we were together at Westtown School in 2005, and it ran for another 15 years. And I would routinely bump into people that would say it's the best college fair I attend all year, college admissions folks. Routinely down in Atlanta, admission officers. And I would always ask them why. And they would say, we get better questions asked at that fair than any fair. Another brief snippet. Up until around 2015 or so, 50% of what I did was boarding school placement. Now it's like 3% boarding, 97 college. But at the time I was helping this student with a boarding school placement, and I'd arranged for an interview with an admission officer, and I'd actually prepped the student for the interview, but the student was, let's just say, a little flat in personality wise. And so the student had the interview, and then afterward actually met with the admission officer, and I said, how'd it go? And the admission officer was really candid with me. She said, I'm going to be honest with you, for the first 15 or 20 minutes, I was thinking, I got to be with this kid for 30 minutes. This is going to be rough. But she said, but then he started asking these incredible questions. And it completely changed my whole perception in this kid. Yeah, I would be very interested in this kid. So that's how that conversation went. So how does this apply? Where does this apply? College fairs. Of course, you can ask great questions. Emails can ask a powerful question. And sometimes, and I'm not going to mention all the ways, but let's mention one other. Sometimes when you sign up for an admissions visit, sometimes there's an opportunity to meet with an admission officer afterward. Sometimes it's right on the actual sign-up form. Would you like to meet with an admission officer? Sometimes it's more formal. You get back and someone say, you have any questions? You want to come back here? And so through the power of great questions, you really can elicit interest in you as an applicant, because it's so rare, first of all, and secondly, it's so important. And so you'll be seen as the person who will stimulate amazing conversations in the classroom. And it's also seen as a reflection of your intelligence. So that's my tip. Admissions vernacular, the word is rig. And rig is just a short form word that sometimes is used for rigor. You know, a lot of times admission officers, they have all this shorthand that they use when they're taking notes and talking fast in committee. Why say rigor when you can just say rig? Save a millisecond. And our big number, and I kind of teased this out if you heard Monday's episode. So in Monday's episode, I talk about how, in my announcement section, I talked about how the University of Kansas is looking at dropping 42 academic programs. This is the flagship school for the state. Why? Because they have a $75 million budget shortfall. So that's our big number for the week. $75 million shortfall for University of Kansas. Been giving money to everything but higher and of course, cutting taxes. And then now there's no opportunity to invest. So there you go. $75 million, University of Kansas budget shortfall for the flagship school. All right, Dave, take it away.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
All right, we have a very interesting article today, very apropos. It is on debt. And the article is actually a summary of a conversation that occurred in NPR between two people, Josh Michel and Michael Martin. And Michel Martin, sorry. And Michel, is it Michel or Michael? Let's say Michel.
Yeah.
But bottom line, she starts off saying that as people head back to school, we got a lot of crises going on. But there's another crisis that students and families are facing that's been around for decades. And it's the student loan debt crisis. And as of now, Americans owe some $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. And so she talks with a journalist who's just written a book. The journalist is Josh Michel. And he basically talks about how programs meant to be a ticket to the middle class grew to be an anchor around the neck of millions of Americans. This fascinating book is called The Debt Trap: How Student Loans Became a National Catastrophe. So they start the conversation by saying, let's look at the numbers. And the number of people who have defaulted on their student loans is 8 million people. And that's not far off from the number of people who defaulted on their homes and lost them in foreclosure during the last housing crisis in 2008. And if you look at the number of seniors who have had their Social Security checks garnished in recent years, there's more than 1 million people that have had their checks in Social Security garnished because they can't pay their student debt. Imagine that. You're retired, you're on Social Security, and the government is garnishing your checks because you could never pay off your student debt. And these people are going to have the debts hanging over them literally for the rest of their lives. So the conversation by Michel Martin is, how did this happen? How did something that was meant to get people out of poverty and into the middle class flip around and become something that's an anchor and is actually pulling people down? So Mitchell goes through some historical data, and she says it started when Lyndon Johnson successfully pushed Congress to create the student loan program in 1965. And it sounded great. We were going to give students loans to go to college. But the problem is they relied on banks to make the loans. And the reason why they relied on banks to make the loans and not the federal government to make the loans is because, from an accounting perspective, if the government made the loans, it would cause the deficit to go up. And to avoid a paper hit on the deficit, they said, let's have the banks make the loans and it'll make the program look really cheap. But it wasn't, it was just a paper thing. And then this is where higher education became a big profit center because the student loan program was intended to help people pay for tuition. But what they argue is it introduced banks into the process and created what they called a Frankenstein named Sally Mae that was used to help banks get the money to lend students. And it caused college to become intertwined with the bankers, and it had schools have a financial interest in getting people into a lot of debt and debt that they often couldn't repay. So they switched to a main character of the book, a secretary in the early 1990s who in her 20s wanted to improve her life and go to college. She ended up getting a PhD, but the problem is it cost her $120,000 in debt. And the worst part of it is that while she was in school studying, unable to pay down that debt, the interest was steadily accruing. So that by time she got out, she found that she owed so much debt that she couldn't repay it, and she ended up going into bankruptcy. And they talk about how this is such a recurrent story, and not only does it wreck people financially, but it wrecks them psychologically because they have so much shame, thinking, here I am supposed to be successful, and all I ended up doing is being impoverished. And the last thing I'd like to talk about is how it flipped the script in a lot of our generational wealth, because where parents used to pass down wealth to their children, it turned out that kids were now starting to pass up debt to their parents, because if the kids couldn't pay the debt, oftentimes the parents who co-signed these loans became responsible for the debt. So in their old age, instead of them having a retirement or wealth to pass on to their kids, they had to assume this debt. And so it became generational. Not only could the kids not pay, but the parents could not pay as well. So let me stop here, Mark, because there's a lot to digest in this, but I thought it was a fascinating discussion.
Yeah, no, thanks, Dave, for that. And I think the history is so important. I want to share even more of the history. Now, this is a book I've recommended before as a recommended resource. Once again, it's called The Debt Trap, subtitle, How Student Loans Became a National Catastrophe. But right now, there's so much talk in the news about loan cancellation and all that. And I want people to understand kind of where some of the energy comes from. When you understand the history, you understand the role. Sure, lending institutions, they've been absolutely at fault. Colleges, absolutely at fault. But nobody's been more at fault than the politicians and policies that they put in place. And so here's just a little bit more background. So at the time, Sputnik had totally shocked the world, especially the United States. And it was a real wake-up call to the Johnson administration. It was a shocking realization there could be another nation that could dominate the U.S. technologically. And so Congress felt that we need to do something and do something fast. So you say, what's Sputnik? Well, we're talking about the 60s. And based on our questionnaires, most people at that time, our listeners, either weren't born or they were like in diapers or young. And so nobody was probably following this at the time, but we do have students of history. So the USSR had rocketed to the lead in the Cold War space race when they launched Sputnik, which was basically a basketball-sized satellite that had become the first man-made object ever to orbit the Earth. And Johnson thought, oh my goodness, America has got to become more educated. We've got to be the technological leaders. We cannot let the USSR, Russia, supplant us. And Johnson had an interesting history. He grew up poor in Texas, and he actually went to college on loans. But he went to college at a time when loans were capped, nowhere near like what you see today. And so he had a pretty favorable view of loans. He knew firsthand that a degree could lift somebody out of poverty because it was his experience. So he wanted to fight a war when he became president, not just the Cold War, but the war on poverty. So he tried to fight two wars, the Cold War and the war on poverty. But what he didn't know was that he would eventually do something that would greatly enrich banks and universities and toss students into life-altering debt. And so this article basically, Dave said, explains the history of how do we get here and how do we get into what Josh Mitchell calls a monster. And so it starts out with the combination of the lending industry, banks, private corporations, governments arranging the funding along with colleges that take in the money. And what type of destruction do we see? Well, here's some stats. There are over 1 million people that owe over $200,000. And the total amount of student debt, which is held by the federal government, 1.7 trillion, is equal to the gross domestic product of Canada. So how did this happen? A few more details. Well, this is interesting because initially some people had proposed that what the United States should do is have a loan and a scholarship program. It should be a hybrid system, similar to what you see in other places in the world. And in this system, the first 2 years of college were going to be free. But there was real resistance to this. Some people felt like this is just going to balloon the deficit. And this is at the time of Vietnam. So this is seen as untenable to blow your deficit up at Vietnam. And then other people argued this is socialism, to let people go to college for free. So loans were seen as more American. They were seen as more of an individual solution. And let's put the burden on individuals and not put the burden on society. In other words, pass the burden on to individual students and parents. Well, to lend without appearing to raise the debt, Congress actually created an organization called Sallie Mae. And many people might have heard that name, Sallie Mae. It's a government-sponsored corporation that facilitated everything. So they bowed to the pressure from Congress, from lobbyists, and they agreed to cover 100%. Bowing to the pressure from lobbyists, Congress agreed to cover 100% of defaults on student loans that were made by Sallie Mae. So basically, you're guaranteeing profits for Sallie Mae and all of Sallie Mae's bank partners. And then Congress neglected to have any oversight over the lending progress. So Sallie Mae has no skin in the game. He gives out loans to virtually anybody with a pulse. And then college admissions exploded and universities could jack up their tuition because they were completely being bankrolled. And Mitchell calls this in his book the quintessential form of crony capitalism. And this is something interesting. Right now, university lobbyists are the third largest group of lobbyists in Washington because they've got such a vested interest in keeping this easy money flowing. And students can get approved on the grad school level through what's called a grad plus loan for loans up to the cost of attendance. So you can get a loan to cover all your law school, all your med school without any much of a credit check at all. And parents can loan up to the cost of attendance, even if their income is nowhere near to the point where they would be able to pay for that. Because the Parent Plus loan doesn't even look at debt income ratios like you do if you're buying a house or even a car. They just look at adverse credit history. So Mitchell calls this basically predatory lending on par with the subprime mortgage boom that caused the crash in 2008. And one last thing. In Mitchell's research, he caught up with the head of the Congressional Budget Office. Her name is Alice Rivlin. And in 1969, she was the main one that famously championed the idea of going with loans over scholarships. And so she's still alive. And so he caught up with her in his research, to say, what are your thoughts now that you opted to go for loans over scholarship? And Rivlin said to Mitchell, we unleashed a monster. So that's just a little bit of how we literally have a debt problem that's more debt than all auto loans, more debt than all credit cards. The only debt that's bigger than student loan debt right now is mortgage debt. And basically the gross domestic product of Canada. So Dave, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's excellent, Mark. And I'd just like to dovetail on what you said that they say at the end of this article. And that was the notion of skin in the game. They bring out this great part that when colleges prior to this program actually gave students the loans out of their own coffers, there was a very low default rate. Why? Because colleges knew that it would be imprudent for them to loan kids money that they could not possibly repay because they would be hurting. So they kept the loan amounts in check and also kept the costs in check because they were ultimately responsible. But what Sally Mae did was it disconnected the accountability process. So the colleges had no skin in the game. They're like, if the student defaults, we still got the money. And consequently, their costs got totally inflated without any sense of whether their clients, the students, can pay. Because if they defaulted, they weren't going to be hurt. And we hear about how the administrations of colleges ballooned, the capital expenses went way out of control, the tuition went up multiple times, and default rates completely soared. And so, what he's saying is that we've got to have colleges become more accountable financially to the ability of students to repay this debt. And that will directly help us keep college costs in line because colleges won't jack up tuition beyond which they know most students can pay. And if you're giving out English degrees, we've talked about this, if you're giving out fine arts degrees, and the average student is going to be struggling just to make 40 grand, there's no way you could keep charging $80,000 for that fine arts degree because your clients, the customers, will never be able to repay the cost of that. So this disconnect that we need to address, this lack of skin in the game by the colleges.
Yeah, and I've thought about this. So who's at fault? Well, everybody's at fault to some degree. Certainly, you could say, well, banks are at fault, but banks are banks. They exist to make money. You give them a way to make money, they're going to do it. You can say colleges are at fault, and to a certain extent, they do have some culpability. But if you've got Uncle Jay, you're a family. Let's say you make 80,000, or you can make 180,000. Doesn't matter. 280. It doesn't matter. If Uncle Jay gives you $50,000 for Christmas every Christmas, and he just sends it in the mail, he doesn't. No need to tell me how you spend it. It's your money. Do your thing. In fact, you don't even see Uncle Jay. Just get a $50,000 check every Christmas. There's a very good chance you're probably going to spend that money in some imprudent ways. Like the average person, they just are. And so, I think you'd have to be naive to think if you have unlimited ability to have access to money, that it's going to lead to the most fiscal responsibility.
It's like asking a fox, putting it in the hen house and say, there's 10 chickens. They got to last 10 days. Only eat one chicken a day. You come back, that fox has eaten up all them chickens in 24 hours, and you were surprised? We let the fox into the hen house.
I'm shocked you didn't have a movie reference from Top Gun or something like one of these things. But I'll go for your fox hen one work this time.
Well, courtesy of my working in rural North Carolina, I'd bring in that.
There you go. Showing the diversity of your talents and experiences. I'm not trying to absolve colleges, but I just think like human nature. Human nature, banks are going to make money. Human nature, you've got this endless flow of money. Why not expand your tuition, pay your faculty more? Why not hire more administrators for those dream positions you always wish you could have? Do all your building projects and do all that. That's going to happen. Some people say, well, the student's responsible. Well, something, I'll tell you something that I've learned. Kids don't really understand money until they actually get out and start paying bills. I saw that. I have 23 and 26-year-olds. I've seen this with my own kids. As long as I was bankrolling them, they didn't understand the money. You know when this really hit me, Dave? So Joy came back from, she was an undergraduate. She's at the University of Georgia. And she comes back on a weekend. I can't remember the details. I can't remember if it was a holiday or weekend. And so we have this section in our garage. Everybody calls it the Costco section because And it actually started during the pandemic. So I just started hoarding like massive amounts of like, supplies so that we have this huge supply of everything we need there. And so Joy's on her way back to college, and I give her like a 24 pack of ultra soft Charmin toilet tissue, and she hugs it and she's like, toilet tissue. Like, she would have never done that before when I was paying for everything. I started having her pay for her own stuff, and I saw immediately how she started appreciating something that she wouldn't have even had a second of a thought over.
Yeah, remember during the pandemic, that's the one thing you couldn't find was TP.
Yes, that is true. And I see this with my own students I work with. Unfortunately, I'm actually talk more about this another time. I've been wanting to talk about this. Sometimes I see parents make irresponsible financial decisions by taking on more than they can afford. And sometimes kids are actually, unfortunately, pressuring parents. Come on, mom, I'll do it. I'll get a job. I'll work. They don't know what they're talking about. Do you know how much 50 or 60,000 is, for a family without means? And the kid is just saying, I'll get scholarships. I'll do this. I'll do that. Please, I really want to go here. This is my dream school. And then it just tugs on the parents' heartstrings. And once again, the amount of money is not the point. Some people can pay $50,000 with one check. Another person, that's more than they make in a year. So I see that happen. I see how kids don't understand the value of money. I really put this mostly on the politicians. I put it mostly on the politicians. I do put it partially on the colleges, partially on the whole exploitive bank system. And I think everybody has a little bit of skin in the game when it comes to culpability. But you passed policies. Another thing the article talks about we never brought up. So one thing that was enacted as part of a policy was to have interest accrue while kids are in school. And that was partly done as a way to drive down the deficit.
Right.
But think about that for someone that goes on and gets a PhD. In fact, that was, Dave, you wanted to comment on that?
I was going to say, when kids don't understand, and you brought that point, is they don't understand compounded interest. They don't understand 4 years of not paying down a loan. And when you actually do the math and show them the math, it blows their mind. But they sign on these loans. They don't realize they have compounded interest on the principal. And if they're delaying paying that for 4 years, they've literally added 25, 30% to their ultimate debt pay down. They don't get it because they don't see the math. So adults don't see the math.
Well, and where it really gets bad, Dave, is grad school.
Right.
Like, because for the federal direct student loan, it is capped at $27,000 over 4 years, $31,000 over 5 years. So there were some safety mechanisms put in place to at least keep these crazy amounts of loan debt that you hear. Now, of course, what happens with interest over, 5-10 years, if you're out and you're underemployed, you can't pay, maybe that 27,000 is now 50 or 60. But what really gets people in trouble is when they go to grad school. Let's say you get an undergrad degree in psych, and then you say, oh, I need to get a PhD. So now you spend another 6 to 7 years, or the same thing for med school. You go on to become a psychiatrist, or any specialty. Now, Grad Plus loan lets you borrow up to cost of attendance. So now it's not a cap on you of $27,000 over 4 years, or $31,000 over 5. Literally, you could take out a loan for $80,000 for 1 year and do that for 4 years, and then you've got residency, and all the time the loan is compounding. And that's how you see the people with the 200, 300, 400. One person I know had $700,000 of medical student loan debt because their parents were not in a position to pay for undergrad or for med school.
Well, just to add on to that, and it really must be emphasized, student loan debt is one of the few forms of debt, student loans and not paying your taxes, that you cannot discharge in bankruptcy, number one, and they do garnish your Social Security. It's like a tattoo on your butt. It's never going away.
Over 1 million people are getting their wages garnished.
Absolutely,
for
absolutely.
loan debt by the
And for many
government.
people, that makes the difference of having to not work in retirement or pick up a job bagging groceries at Walmart. I mean, it's that serious, you know. So yeah, bad news.
And you can just see, I mean, let's face it, we grow up in a culture where you're taught, especially if you're in middle class culture, and this can be lower middle class. It doesn't have to be middle, or upper middle, but you're taught that you need to go to college if you want a future.
Yeah.
And it's bad. It's worse for lower middle because lower middle usually are kids whose parents don't have the ability to pay much.
Yeah.
So it's all being financed by loans. And I mean, one thing that Josh Mitchell does beautifully in the book is he has these human interest stories, like 5 or 6 people intertwined throughout the whole book to make this really human. And we're not just talking about numbers, right? Like the person you talked about, they go for an undergraduate degree, and next thing you know, they go for 12 years. And next thing you know, it's $120,000 in psychology. Next thing you know, they have $120,000 of debt. And it just keeps mushrooming. And they're like, what did I do wrong? I thought I was doing absolutely everything right to try to live a better life for my family. And so that's why I'm very sympathetic to the fact that the politicians got us in this mess. I do believe they have a responsibility to come up with a solution to get us out of this mess. And that's part of the reason why there's tremendous momentum growing for canceling some of this debt, because none of this would have happened if safeguards would have been put in place.
I agree. And just the last point I'd like to make is I think this has been one of the major drivers fueling this cynicism, this backlash against college education, this anger that people feel that, hey, what? You want me to go to college? I did what you asked, and now you've just indebted me for the rest of my life, and I still can't find a job. So yeah, I think this is, you know, we tried to have this program to encourage people to go into to college, but the backlash is that today college is less respected than at any time in its history. So it's had some real consequences.
So Dave, that's not, your point is not just opinion, it's fact.
Yeah.
Because they've actually done surveys of people at various debt levels, asking them if college is worth it. And when you get into people with high levels of debt, it's a little bit more than 50% that say it wasn't. And when you have lower levels of debt, you have people that say that it was. Now it's close. The numbers are close. It's like, 52-48, something like that. But that's bad. That's a bunch of people walking around that said, I got $110,000 worth of debt and I regret it.
And just to add one more cap, this is why we always emphasize, don't just look at rankings. Because the reality is no school, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, no school is worth getting into excessive debt. And the purpose of this podcast is to find a great education, one that suits you, but one you can afford, one you can pay for.
And there's so many affordable options that are out there. So that's a good point, Dave. Like, one thing that it behooves everybody to know, what is this school going to cost before I even start the process? Because once they get their hooks in you, it's harder to turn around to your kid who you love, who you'll do anything for, and now they're addicted to the school. And so I'm a big believer in assessing before you even start your journey, what is it that you can afford as a family? And you will only look at schools that fit that budget. It's called financial match. And not enough counselors talk about financial match, especially independent counselors. Not enough of them do. There's a big focus on academic match. There's a big focus on that. A little bit of a focus on social match. There's not enough of a focus on financial match. When I'm working with the family, I get all of that information and I have to ask very personal questions, but I need to know, what is your ability and willingness to pay X amount of dollars? Because if you tell me that you can afford $30,000, $40,000, and that's including student and parent, $50,000, then why are we looking at $85,000 schools? Now, I don't fault the parent. It's my job to educate, because most people don't know what schools are not going to give you any merit money. There's a lot of people out here, Dave, that do not qualify for any need-based aid that aren't wealthy, because you can live in a higher cost area And you can have one parent that makes 150, another parent that makes 110. So now you make 260,000, and it looks like you have a lot of money. But based on where you live, and maybe you have a kid in private school or two, you are not in a place to be able to pay $85,000 a year. And there are a lot of schools, and they tend to be a lot of the schools that have their prestige that people want to go to, that do give no merit-based money at all. And so you're going to be in a situation, if you go to X school, where they're going to turn around, and I say it's not just 80 to 85, that's after tax money. And keep in mind, you can expect tuition increases for the next 4 years. So are you prepared to pay around $100,000 after taxes per year? Now, there's some people that absolutely can do that, because this is all relevant. Like for some people, $100,000 to one person is like $1,000 to somebody else. So this is why this is so personal. You can't just come out with blanket edicts across the board. But everybody's pockets are vary in how deep they go. But this is one of the big problems I see in college counseling, and I try to nip it in the bud right away. People come to me and they say, "Oh, I do the financial assessment." I say, "Right, okay, you're not going to qualify for any need-based financial aid," but they feel like they could pay maybe 50 or 55 or 35 or whatever, but they want to look at schools like the Ivies or Tufts or Swarthmore or Haverford or Pomona or Stanford or Northwestern or Duke or Emory or Williams or Middlebury, or I could go on and on and on and on. These schools give either zero need-based or merit-based financial aid, or if they give any, you just need to walk on water and find a cure to cancer to get it.
Yeah.
Final thoughts, Dave.
Well, I want to end with a car analogy. One of my good buddies, he's like in his 50s, and decides, he goes and buys himself a Hellcat, bright candy apple red. And so he buys it and pays full price and is able to work out the payments and so forth. Then he goes to try and get the thing insured. And like State Farm jacks his rates more than he's paying for his teenage son. And he's like, "Man, what are you doing, man? I am 55 years old. Why are you jacking up my rates just because I went out and bought a Hellcat?" And they told him, "Well, we figure if you're going to go out and act like a teenager, we're going to charge you like a teenager." So the key is, just like the Hellcat, you have to know the full cost of ownership of anything before you commit to the bottom line.
And that's the drop the mic word there from
That's right.
Dr. David Williams.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, the last 2 weeks we've had part 1 and part 2. This will be part 3, which will be the final part. Listen and enjoy. All right, Lisa, why don't you give us the last question?
All right, so this is a great question, and it's, should we be advocating for our student to get tutoring if they're struggling academically?
So I have a basic view, which is, and I've said this at least once or twice on the podcast before, but it feels like it's been a year or two. If you always do what you've always done, then you'll always get what you've always got. And in other words, like, if what you're currently doing isn't working, you really do need a different course of action. And so if somebody is struggling academically and they're not grasping the material, then the first thing that I would say is they should be absolutely in touch with the Academic Success Center. Every school's got one. Mm-hmm. There's a range of services that they all provide, whether it's speed. I remember when I was at Michigan State, one thing I took advantage of was the speed reading courses, because I'm like, I had so much reading to do. And so I kept taking speed reading courses. So they have different services, time management. But one thing they all have is tutoring. Like every single place has tutoring, and every place is going to have some version of peer tutoring too. So, well, you have to be careful with colleges saying every single, but let's just say the overwhelming lion's share of places will have. So, so there's peer tutoring versus professional tutoring. That could be a whole other conversation. I feel that if a student is struggling academically and they're open to tutoring, like, why not? Why like, to me, that's like you're out in the deep water, your swimming skills aren't that great, you're kind of drowning. Does the lifeguard say, figure it out on your own? No. So I'm an advocate of tutoring, when someone's struggling academically, not only because of it can help you in the class, but it's hard to kind of feel good about yourself when you're struggling and you're not doing well. So then then it lapses over into the whole mental health thing too. Right. And so then your academic performance impacts your mental health, and then you just start spiraling downward. So I'd rather catch that bad boy before you're, in a catatonic state in a corner, completely depressed. But what are your thoughts, Lisa?
Well, I mean, I'm wondering if there's like part of the nuance of this question that Diana asked is, let's say your kid is academically struggling, and I think most 99% of people would be like, yeah, tutoring is a good idea. But what if your kid is in that 1%, then they're not wanting to get tutoring. And then there's conflict in the parental relationship about that. How much do you push? How much do you say, like, I'm not paying for the school if you don't go see that calculus tutor? That kind of thing, I think, can be a really difficult situation.
I'm glad you went there, because the scenario that I described was kind of the simpler one, right? Like, the student is struggling. They know they're struggling. They want to get a tutor. Like, why would you not? Like, these situations you're talking about are real. And it's very tricky too, because you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So you do want to have that student buy-in. But at the same time, if they say, they don't want to do it and they fail the class, I'm kind of a tough love parent and stuff like that. Like, you can take it again and pay for it yourself.
Right.
I tried to reach out and help you, and I really don't think if I had a child who was struggling and they didn't want any help, I'm not going to keep bailing them out and saying, well, I'll just keep paying for you to fail courses all the time. Of course, let's even make it more complex. It may not be a situation of a failure. It could just be a D. But like when I was in grad school, you know what they used to say? D means degree.
When I was in grad school, they said you couldn't get below a B, like below a B, no PhD. But that was, I don't know, maybe they just.
That's a better rhyme than mine.
But, no one ever did. They never would give us below a B. It just would be rude. So, yeah, I think the one thing that I think I would struggle with as a parent, and, so many times kids are getting scholarships or merit aid, and they are contingent on maintaining a certain GPA. So if your kid gets, below a certain GPA, then that could be like a very expensive mistake for the family in a way. And I don't know. So, everyone thinks, oh, merit aid, it's great. But then it comes with this little catch, and if your kid has a bad semester, then it's very nerve wracking.
We have something in Georgia called the Hope Scholarship. Both of my kids had merit scholarships that had GPAs that they had to maintain. I want to say it was a 3.0 for both of them. But in Georgia, this Hope Scholarship, if they check it every 30, 60, 90 credit hours, and you have to have a 3.0. And if you, do you know that 71% of students lose it at some point in their 4 years?
Right.
So what you're talking about is very real.
Mm-hmm.
It's very real. But I remember this one student, he was very, very, very smart. He went off to the University of Georgia, and it was in some pre-med class. Can't remember. I think it was organic, inorganic chemistry. And he failed it. And I remember his parents said, you know what? You'll take it again, and you'll take out student loans or work and pay for it, because we're not paying for it. And he will to this day say that was a huge wake-up call. But your point is well taken. Like, that's one course. You could be talking about, I know Karis had a merit scholarship that was pretty big. It was like around 30 grand. I would not have wanted to see her lose a $30,000 scholarship.
Right.
That's yeah. So these things do get really complicated. What would you advise in that situation, Lisa?
Hide. No, just kidding. Don't hide.
Well, Lily has a scholarship. So did you face this personally when she was struggling?
She dipped like maybe 0.02 below the threshold, But the school told us, don't worry about it. We know your situation. We're not going to do anything, and thankfully, like then, that was just like an anomaly that one semester, and everything else was fine and well within the bounds of the GPA thing. But it was scary. And it was, the kind of thing where, like, if she needed to withdraw a class, and she would be going to part-time status, and then that could make you lose your scholarship. So, I mean, we really had to work with the school a lot about that during that terrible semester.
Yeah, one thing I want everybody to hear: do not expect that. I've talked before about COVID grace. Do not expect that COVID grace. Do not expect that. Oh, you're 0.2 behind, but we'll work with you. No. Like in Georgia, do you know the Hope Scholarship? If you could have a 2.999, you lose it.
Seriously, they don't round up?
No, I had a student, Hampton University is the same way. I had a student that had Hampton's is a 3.3 to keep it. And I had a student that had a 3.299, and she lost her merit scholarship. And so the whole next summer, she worked 40 hours a week for the whole summer at IKEA. And that was just
that was such an unfair punishment. I hate IKEA. It's like putting the kid in like
taught her a lesson.
Bowels of hell.
Taught her a lesson.
Well, the lesson there at school is unreasonable. I mean, like, she's off of points. I don't know. That if I were a parent, I would have an issue with that, and that's probably why it's good. I will probably should not send my kid to any school that does that, because Elon was very helpful with us. So,
well, one thing I don't like. I do not like these schools that have really high GPA. I should have saved this from one of my rants, by the way, but I'm just ranting now. I can rant midterm. But no, some it's not that common. But every now and then I see an outrageous GPA that you need to keep to retain your merit scholarship. It's usually for like their highest ones, presidentials and things like that. But still, like, I've seen 3.7s, and that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I think, just you could get an 1A minus, a couple of times, and then you're at that, so.
That's just too much pressure. Yeah. And quite honestly, I'm not really thrilled with that 3.3, because Hampton does the 3.3 for all of theirs. It's not just like they do that for their top ones. If you get a merit scholarship, 3.3, the 3.299, sorry, you're out. I know we went off on a tangent.
Yeah, but I guess you can't, it's always college is a business, right? And if you can like offer merit scholarships, then not actually have to pay them, maybe that's like part of the package. They probably know how many kids are going to dip below it. And so that's how they budget things.
I mean, I that thought did cross my mind, but I will say I don't find very many schools do that. Like I see 2.5s a lot of times, that you just need to keep. Like, I think most schools are pretty reasonable with what you need to do to kind of maintain your scholarship. But there's definitely a correlation. Like, the larger the scholarship, like even in Georgia, like, we have something called the Zell Miller, which is it's within the same Hope system, but it's higher, right? It's full tuition, where Hope is like 80%, around 80% approximately. And so for Zell Miller, you do need to keep a 3.3. It's a higher GPA in order to retain it. So there does tend to be a correlation between the higher the scholarship, the higher the GPA, which I also understand. The school is giving you cost of attendance or full tuition. Like, they passed over a tremendous amount of people. I don't think it's unreasonable for them to expect you. I still have an issue with the 3.7, but anyway, we're turning this question into something it wasn't. Yeah,
it's all. I mean, I think it's all like, just to say, like, Diana is right. It's super complicated, and there's no one right answer, and every situation is different. I mean, the goal would be to get the child to realize that they need to go ask for help. And I went to the writing tutor at University of Chicago, and it really helped me, because I had a lot of Missouriisms in my writing that I had no idea was not grammatically correct. So, I mean, that really straightened me out, and I'm very appreciative to that tutor.
Yeah, I mean, I think once again, it's about clarity. So if you come to the conclusion, okay, I'm going to let you do it your way, then you spell out the consequences, whatever they are, and you're explicit about it, so the kid's not surprised. That I feel very strongly about, and whatever you decide. I don't feel I can dictate to each parent how they would handle that. I know for me, if my child failed a course, I'm not paying for that again. So, get used to working and taking out student loans. I really don't think we do enough tough love on things like that. And I really do think that's how people grow.
Yeah. It sucks that people have to go through suffering, but I don't see any way around it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the problem is the other option is you keep the training wheels on all the time. You never remove the crutch. And that's just not good. And I find people respect it. They may not like it at the time, but if you talk to somebody who's experienced that tough love, they come to respect it later over time. Especially if it's done in love, not done in anger, haste, and resentment.
Mm-hmm. True.
Yeah.
True. Absolutely.
Well, Diana, thank you so much. And not only did you ask some amazing questions, but we've been saying we haven't done enough really to address the college experience. Can I share what you think I'm going to share, Lisa, or do you not want me to say it?
Oh yeah, no, go ahead. No secrets here.
Yeah. So Lisa has secured a fantastic interview, a former dean of residential life at two colleges, Middlebury and Sewanee, and they'll be talking about a lot of these kinds of, a lot of transition to college issues, challenges, everything from, sexual assault to you name it. They're going to really get into the nitty gritty, and you can expect that interview. I really am hoping we can air it in August because it could be helpful information for people before they go to college for freshmen.
Yeah, we're going to try to record it like either next week or the following week. So hopefully then, we'll have our part done and hopefully you can get.
Well, then, you know what? I'll do my part and make sure we get it in August. You do that. You do your part, I'll do mine. So look for that, because the only other, we've had some interviews with college staff, but not very many. Like multiple interviews with financial aid people who work at colleges, like Michael Rooney-Woods at WashU and David Jelinas at Davidson. And then we had Emily Griffin on talking about career centers. But I think you can count every interview we've had with a current college non-admissions person on one hand. And this is why the survey was so helpful. And I thank every one of you who did it. When I looked at those 215 surveys and I saw 31.8% of people have a kid in college, I'm like, whoa. But it makes sense. Just because you're listing for your college-bound kid now doesn't mean that's your oldest.
Right,
look at
absolutely.
you. You're the,
exactly.
Yeah. So, it's been a desire on a long part for Lisa and I to kind of deliver more college content, because not only does it benefit 1/3 of you who have a kid in college, but it's also interesting for you, in high school, knowing that this is coming up really soon.
Yeah, it's always good to be prepared.
Yeah, now that we have the Monday episodes, we plan on doing a lot more stuff. There's just so much that you can do, and Lisa and I are in conversations about that. And so, excited to hear your interview, Lisa.
Oh yeah, me too. I'm very excited about it. I think I read over his presentation. I'm like, dang, I wish someone had told me this before I sent my kid to college. So I'll be prepared for the second one now.
Well, I just want to thank Diana, because it really was her initial email that kind of jolted us, because she's like, I'm looking through all your episodes and there's a few things I'm not necessarily finding. And like I said, I think that we have kind of got focused on admissions
right
almost too much. It's important, but it's not the only piece of it's not about drop them off and then they're all completely on their own and parents are on, right? So look for more of that from us.
There's so much emphasis even on getting first generation kids or low income kids into school, but there's nothing about keeping them in school and helping them succeed in school. And I think that's kind of true for all students in general. Because it's not just, you don't just get in to not get out. So we have to make sure we have all our ducks in a row on helping kids stay in college and succeed.
Yeah. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, Diana.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
All right, friends, hopefully you've enjoyed the first two parts of our trilogy with someone who truly is a real pro, Karen Kristof. I'm excited to say that when this part goes live, part 3, I will be on the campus of Colorado College. So I'll be visiting in late June. I'm excited to be there. In the final part, Karen goes deep into into understanding Colorado College. She explains the 3 Ps that make Colorado College special. She talks about the type of student that thrives in their block plan. She talks about their strongest programs, and she talks about what Colorado College needs to do to improve. Listen and enjoy. All right, Karen, we're going to talk about Colorado College. And I think you're such a great person to talk to once again, because you've been at multiple institutions. So I think you have a unique vantage point of being able to talk about what makes CC distinctive and special and different than other places that you've worked at. So I'm just going to throw it out open-endedly and see what you have to say. You know, students always have to do the why us or the why this school. So this is like the admission officer's version of why this school.
I know. This is really turning the tables on me, Mark. I love it, right?
I'm enjoying it.
I really need to come up with a great answer. And actually, it's so easy to come up with a great answer to that question, because I don't think I've seen an institution as distinctive as special as Colorado College is. So I'm going to use the 3 Ps to start this conversation, which is people, program, and place, because I think those are the things that really are distinctive in the small liberal arts college landscape. So I'll try just to give you 2 or 3 bullet points on each one, but then we can dig into wherever you'd like to go. So let me start with place, because I think place is, we are located in a place where there are no other liberal arts colleges. So in not just the state of Colorado, but the Rocky Mountain West. This is not like the Northeast or other places where you throw a stone and hit 5 liberal arts colleges. So we are a really special place when it comes to that. I think the other part of our place that is distinctive is that you look to the west, and our backyard are the Rocky Mountains, specifically Pikes Peak, which is, if you're a mountain aficionado, is one of 54 Fort-Teeters in Colorado. So one of 54 mountains at 14,000 feet or above. So incredibly beautiful and majestic. And we are 1 mile north of downtown Colorado Springs, which is the 2nd largest city in Colorado. So you get that feel for an urban setting as well. So I think the place, and as we talk about program and people, the place really informs who our students are and what they come to Colorado College to do. So, but just sort of setting up that our distinctiveness in terms of our location. So on the program side, we have, this is year 52, have had something called the block plan. So what is the block plan? It is basically 1 course at a time. Each course lasts 3.5 weeks. So you do what would be the equivalent of a trimester or a semester in 3.5 weeks. It's ambitious for sure. Classes are small. Average class size is 16, but actually capped at 25. So even an introductory science class, which could grow pretty large at even small colleges, would be capped at 25. And so a typical day in the life of a CC student would be 9 to 12. You are in class for 3.5 weeks. We give you the weekend off. Sometimes I forget to say that. And
you got to get to those mountains.
Saturday and Sunday too. But 3.5 weeks. So very deep engagement, very immersive, very focused. And it's not surprising, certainly as a small liberal arts college, we have good collaborations between students and faculty, but imagine spending, 18 days with this same group of peers and a very dedicated, engaged professor. So there's lots of great stuff that happens. And as to enjoying the mountains, after each block, students get at least 4.5 days off. So most blocks end Wednesday at noon. And then you are off until the following Monday. And so what the block breaks do is give you an opportunity to exhale. Our students, many of them come in loving outdoor activities to begin with. You might, if you're coming to Colorado, be a skier or a hiker or a biker. And then we have lots of programs for students that think it would be cool to give that a shot, like have never lived in this part of the country and would love to be able to sort of explore. So that block break gives you an opportunity to exhale. I talked to an alum at one point when I first arrived who graduated in the 70s, just as the block plan was starting. And he and his friends decided to spend every block break building themselves a cabin in the woods. And it took them
Wow.
like more than 2 years to do it, but that's how they use their block break. So there's great, our outdoor education program has programs. You can just do your laundry, you can just hang out with your friends, but it gives you an opportunity to really exhale and enjoy the place that we're in. I think the other really amazing thing about the block plan is because students are only taking one class at a time, if your class should be conducted elsewhere than your classroom and on the Colorado College campus, we can do that. So I'll give you one great example of that. We have a professor in the psychology department who teaches a course on perception and cognition. And she thinks the best place to hold this class is Florence, Italy, because there's a lot of things to see and a lot of things to understand and a lot of things to talk about. So she, for that entire block, takes her students to Florence, and they
Wow.
spend 3.5 weeks in Italy. So you can imagine what it'd be like to take a geology class and go out and really explore the Pikes Peak region. So it really is experiential, hands-on, exciting learning. My third bullet point, so I don't lose track here, because I could talk about Colorado College forever, is our people. And so who are our people? Imagine being a professor that wants to teach in this way. So you are deeply engaged with your students. You are excited about taking your passion for the subject and really extending that 3.5 weeks at a time to this very intense, academic operation. Our students are excited about learning, deeply curious, but they're not too intense, right? It's very interesting. Part of it is being in Colorado. Part of it is being able to be outside, enjoying the things that go on. Our students just care so deeply about many things, sustainability. We are a carbon neutral campus, have been for a number of years. So they care about the environment, they care about each other. So I think part of that is extending that sort of beyond the walls of the classroom and using block breaks and other engagements to really begin to sort of understand that. So they are a fun group. We have a lot of skateboards on campus. We have a lot of folks who bike. We just have a place where students know how to work hard and know how to take care of themselves and others. So it's really a distinctive place.
Well, my brothers lived in Littleton for over 30 years. And
Cool.
I just think it's the Colorado way. It's very
Yes.
much, and I see it also in the Pacific Northwest too. It's
Yeah.
balanced. It's enjoying nature and serious about your studies and your pursuits,
Yes.
but not going to let it consume you.
That's exactly right.
And not develop other parts of your being, whether that's your physical fitness or your social life. And
Right.
yeah. And
I will say one thing that might distinguish us from the Pacific Northwest, where there are amazing colleges, is did I mention 300 days of sunshine in Colorado?
No, you didn't, but that's good.
Oh, okay. Now I've said
300 days
it.
of rain.
Well, I wasn't going to say that. I'm glad, but it is one thing that there is something about seeing the mountains on a sunny day versus seeing the mountains or getting outside on your bike on a rainy day. But that's for another podcast.
Well, my brother preaches that all the time. He's like, people think it's so cold here, but they don't understand it. It might get cold, but then the next thing you know, it's 70 degrees. He's always telling me that. So yeah, awesome. Let's go back to one course at a time, because it's unique. I mean, I know Cornell College has it in Iowa, and if there's others, you're the only two I know of. So I know it's not that common.
Yeah.
Is there a kind of student that does well in that environment? Is there a kind of student that doesn't do well?
Yeah,
and if there is, could you sort of tell us what that looks like?
Yeah.
I do know that a lot of students will reach out to me and say, my child has ADD, so I really think that this one course at a time would be great for them. But I'm sure, there's pros and cons beyond just ADD. I'd love to hear your answer to that.
Yeah, that's such a great question, and something that I was so curious about when I first got here 18 months ago, because I think there's some ways in which this message of one class at a time is incredibly appealing to a wide range of students, right? Would you rather have 7 classes at once, or would you rather just do one at a time? So, the typical high school student is, wild about this idea, right? The idea that I don't have to maintain the same kind of academic momentum across 4 or 5 or 6 classes, right? So for the student who is struggling with issues of focus and attention, it can be easier because all of their resources can be dumped into this particular class. So it is interesting that and I'll be honest with you, I was a little bit surprised that some learning profiles that might seem counterintuitive, right? So for instance, ADHD, ADD, attention type learning differences actually do fine in the block plan. Part of that is the other way to think about what happens during the block is everybody is at attention during the block, which is to say, if you need something, your advisor's ready to help you. If you need something, your professor's ready to help you. It's sort of like we go into high gear across campus during the block. We even have words like blockly, which is, I didn't even know it was a word, right? But we really are so focused around that calendar and that
What's
structure.
blockly?
Blockly is like, instead of something happening once a month, it happens every 3.5 weeks.
Oh,
so Mark, let me call you Blockly to have a meeting. So we really do. It's a funny vernacular, but it really, I think, does speak to the way in which there's so much support and resources. Right. I think that mental health challenges that we're all experiencing on college campuses can play out in different ways on the block. So what I would say is that for students who are struggling, lots of college students are struggling with depression and anxiety. Those are things that what I hear among faculty and those who are in support services centers on campus is that students need to be able to put up their hand. So if there's a student that's worried, oh my gosh, I could be, in a position where I would struggle. I would have a hard time getting to class. And once you miss 3 or 4 classes on the block, it'd be really hard to sort of, recoup. But I think we know those students and we know what to do to make sure that they get what they need. So I think it's a very affirmative place to put up your hand and ask for help. And you will find people sort of at the ready, knowing that this is not a 16-week slog. It's 3.5 weeks at a time and an opportunity to sort of, refresh and reflect. So I think more students would work in this setting than you might guess. I think the advantage for the students who are really poised to find this invigorating, right, are the students that want to dig really deeply, that the idea of stopping a class conversation after 45 minutes is what frustrates them about high school. Not the balance of 7 classes, but the fact that I'm so engaged in this conversation about molecular biology, I can't stop. I don't want to stop. And I would love not to just be sitting in the classroom. I would love to get out and see what that looks like, right? I would love to get out and do that sort of hands-on research. I would love to leave campus. I would love to have this be a very active learning environment. You were teasing me about the fact that we ask students to say why they're applying.
Sure.
So I love to think about the answers that help me talk about Colorado College in a way that's very compelling. And one student described it as, in her mind, Colorado College was an and, right? Which is, there's all this learning, happens a lot of campuses, but there's so many other ways in which we do it and so much richness and vibrancy in the way the block plan content is delivered and the way that students engage in really deep and meaningful conversations in ways that are incredibly immersive. She saw that as an and, right? That it's not a matter of you choose this or you choose that, that in fact, the block plan gives you so much that in her mind, it was sort of an and, which I really loved. And it's, what a Colorado College faculty member would say is, we hardly ever say no to students, right? That this is also a place that gives you that opportunity to continue the conversation, that you're not, you get to focus as a scholar on those students in that time block and not worried about the class that you have the next day, or have you graded papers for that class that you have only on Wednesdays and Fridays, right? So it gives faculty an opportunity to be deeply immersed as well.
This is great. So every school has distinctive programs or maybe some majors that are exceptionally strong amongst them all being strong. Maybe it's the breadth of the faculty, and it's always a delicate conversation because,
Yeah,
I
sure.
say, what are your strongest programs? And not trying to infer that anything you don't mention isn't strong.
For
But
sure.
what would be some programs that you would say that they're, whether it's the caliber of the faculty or the course selection or anything else, maybe unique things they do experientially that you feel, boy, if you're interested in studying this, we're as good as it gets, or you really need to take a look at us?
Mhm. That's such a great question, right? So I think a couple things that come to mind. First of all, because of our location, you can imagine we have significant depth in environmental science,
Sure.
and really are leveraging the opportunities both in the classroom and outside of the classroom to really address important issues from both a scientific, climate justice, lots of different sort of ways to sort of leverage that. So I think that's incredible. We have a human biology and kinesiology major, which is a little bit distinctive in a small liberal arts college space. But I think the thing that's most distinctive about it is the place that I will never visit, no matter how many years I stay here, which is the human cadaver lab. So we have a human cadaver lab at Colorado College. So imagine being able to say that you've worked with human cadavers as an undergraduate in a medical school or physician's assistant application, right? So that's, I think, an opportunity that we have that many colleges. So, no question that you can do anatomy and physiology and then some at Colorado College. I think one of the things that I was really struck by as I started my own research about taking this job is there are some majors that also have this really practical component to them, right? So it's economics and business at CC, which I think is a really interesting twist. So you get that theoretical knowledge that's so much an underpinning of understanding that field in a way that's compelling, but you're also thinking about what would it be like to be an entrepreneur? How do we build those particular skills? There's a new program with business ethics and society, right? So what is it about the business world that could be improved, and how could our students learn to do that? So I love those kind of twists. We also have in the English department, creative writing and journalism, right? Again, I think there's some liberal arts colleges that say, journalism, that's a thing you do after you graduate. You don't study journalism. But that's not the way that we feel about journalism and about writing and about applying writing in lots of ways. So I find it that hands-on experiential piece you see echoed through the curriculum. But those are a couple of examples of areas that I think are pretty distinctive and certainly popular from the point of view of our students who are applying.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, our recommended resource for episode 233 is free online tutoring, SAT, and a number of math subjects. And the website is schoolhouse.world. Now, this is actually a website that MIT's admission office has come out recommending. They say now that we're requiring test scores, we're not asking you to pay more money because here's some free tutoring. If you're familiar with Saul Kahn, founder of Khan Academy, he's also founded this website, schoolhouse.world. And the way it works is it's small group tutoring, typically 3 to 10 in a group. They don't commit to that, but that's typically the range. They require you to be 13, and they really have a full range of math tutoring. So, for example, pre-algebra, algebra, geometry, trig, pre-calc, calc, stats, SAT prep, and then they are looking at adding some additional subjects in the future. So this is just a fantastic way to get free tutoring. I'm sure you're wondering how long are the sessions. In some cases, they're 20 minutes. In some cases, they're a few hours. But there's a lot more information, but I can tell you it's free. And I can tell you that Saul Kahn doesn't do things unless he does them very well. So I recommend schoolhouse.world. We'll now return to my interview with Karen Kristof. So here's my toughest question. I always tell students when they visit a campus to start talking informally to students. And I give them 3 or 4 questions I really like. And I'm going to give you the hardest one.
All right.
Karen's in charge. She can make any changes to improve CC. Mm-hmm. What changes would you make?
I have no hesitation in answering that question, which is that I think we need more financial aid at Colorado College. I think we need to make a more significant commitment to socioeconomic diversity, and that will help us achieve a lot of goals. I mean, we're an institution with an anti-racism commitment. It is a walk the talk program because there's a lot of really cool things going on. But I'll tell you this student that has been in my head since I read her application last week. She said she's applying to Colorado College because she doesn't like that Colorado College and other liberal arts colleges. So we're in good company, sadly, in this, have too many people in the top 1%. And she wants to come to Colorado College to help improve that. And that's very risky to put that on your "why are you applying" essay. I think that's saying like, I don't like you, but that's why I'm applying. And yet I thought, oh man, you are the perfect person for us, right? Because not only is that in my heart, I think it's in many people's hearts, but it's exactly where institutions, frankly, should be. Yeah. Institutions that our endowment is not the largest, but our endowment is not the smallest. So we have a visionary new president who keeps asking us what our ideas are. And many of us have put forth this idea of more financial aid, more ability to have a range of socioeconomic diversity. We could be a place that could have more of that and benefit significantly from those students and their experiences, and the ones that want to say, I'm not in the top 1%, and I want this community to be more inclusive in that way.
This is great. So, Karen, anything you haven't shared at all about Colorado College you'd like to leave our listeners with that we haven't addressed?
It is just a really special place, is what I would say. It's doing extraordinary things, and our students come from all over everywhere and really want to engage very deeply. So I hope your listeners will think about it. It's something where there are certain pockets where a lot of people know Colorado College, but I do think it's a place that would love to have your listeners, if they haven't heard about it, dig in a little bit. We even have this tool on our website called Build Your Own Block, which is like real live Colorado College classes. And you can imagine what it'd be like to pick your 8 blocks for your first year, and what combination would you pick, and which ones would you do in what sequence, and just get a sense for what learning is like one class at a time.
Awesome. And I've seen your admit rates. I know you have ED1, ED2, and early action EA. Wouldn't it be fair to say that it's advisable to apply early action if you're not going to apply early decision?
Oh, yes. Oh, you are so
talk
smart,
about that?
Mark. Yeah, of course.
I've seen your 3.9% regular admission acceptance rate.
Yeah, that's often where I start with students is you want to avoid the round with the single digit admit rate, right? I mean, yes. let's just be real here. We want to admit students, right? So avoiding regular action at all costs is really important in the CC system. And we're really straightforward about that, right?
Yeah, I appreciate the transparency.
Yeah, we love when a student chooses ED, but we know there's lots of reasons why a student doesn't. So early action gives a student an opportunity to apply when we have more spaces, when we have more financial aid. Still hard, right? Sure. Somewhere in the 18 to 19% admit rate, but so much better than that single digit admit rate. So yeah, I think, part of that might be starting the process earlier. I know that's always important at any college, but I think we often find students that are applying in January and wish they would have applied earlier.
Sure. You ready for the hot seat?
Oh, yes. This wasn't the hot seat. Whew, I don't know. I think I'm ready. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm ready. Bring it on. Bring it on.
So how does Karen relax and unwind and de-stress?
Wow. I'm a pretty high energy person. So what I would say is relationships de-stress me. So friendships, connections. This is my first time in Colorado, so I spend a lot of time on Zoom and on the phone catching up with people. So that's important to me. Regular exercise is important to me. I'm a bit of a old-fashioned TV person too. So you might find me, watching some episode of some, sitcom to relax me. reading, although this time of year I'm reading so many application essays,
Right.
I would be like reading People magazine. So I'll just confess that guilty pleasure. So
Sure.
yeah.
Awesome. What's your favorite kind of music?
Oh, such a great question. I think I have to go back to 80s music, even though it's in some ways not my most favorite, but it brings back so many memories, right, of high school and college. And I'm always amused at the artists of today who take some of those songs, and my younger colleagues will say, "Oh, that was amazing," right? And I'm like, "Yeah, that was a song that was actually around in the 80s." What? No, that can't be, right? No, this is the person that did it. So I'm a little behind on my most contemporary music, but I feel like a lot of that stuff gets recycled.
Sure.
So
Well,
yeah.
there's just something about music that you liked in your formative years, if that was teens or
Yeah,
20s, that just
right.
has a special place, you know?
Yeah,
I know
for
it is for
sure.
me, most
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
What's one thing on your bucket list?
Oh, I cannot wait to get back on an airplane and leave the US, right? So one of the things that I did in my last job at Smith was I recruited in about 35 different countries. And
Wow.
so I am still, that is just, they have those apps where you can put in all the countries you've been to, and they'll tell you like
Yeah.
what percentage of the world you've been to. And it's
Wow.
pitiful. It's like 12%.
Sure.
Right. So that's on my bucket list too. One of the things that makes me sad is I have a Russian visa that's expiring in May, and I don't think I'm going to make it to Russia between now and then. So, but there's lots of places I haven't been to, so I'm excited to do that.
So of all of the 35 countries that you traveled to, what was your favorite?
So I would say that my favorite region is
Yes.
East and Southeast Asia, right? I
Okay.
spent the most time there, and I like those particular countries for different reasons, right? I think that I grew some of the countries that are easy to travel to, like Singapore, you grow a little bit tired of.
Sure.
And you love the adventure of places like Thailand, right?
Mhm.
You love the adventures of places like Vietnam. So I think those are ones that I've grown to appreciate in a way. The first trip was really hard, right? It was really hard to I still have video from my first trip to Hanoi with the honking motorbikes, right? Where you're like, I have this huge headache, right? And then you realize, wow, but this is just part of the city, the vibrancy, the electricity of the city, right? It's hard to pick a favorite country. I guess if you really made me, it would be oddly Canada. Only because I think I've been like many U.S. citizens who have wanted to cross the border when particular politicians were elected to office. My need to cross the border isn't quite as strong right now, but
Sure.
it's
Well,
always
I'll tell
there.
you this. I don't think you knew this, but I grew up in Canada.
Oh, you did?
And, yeah,
I did not know this.
Yeah, and my brother, who's in Littleton, he said if Trump was reelected, I'm out. His whole family had agreed. They were packing up and moving after 30 plus years.
Same. So, I actually had a place to stay in Vancouver, so I could have made this happen if I really needed to. My Canadian friends were like, okay, you say the word, we'll make up the guest bedroom.
Well, thankfully we avoided that.
Yes,
and if you saw this stuff coming out about him trying to overtake voting booths and pretty scary stuff. We were that close to losing the democracy.
I know. It was more than just one horrible individual, right? It was somebody who had the ear of too many people and could dismantle all the things that are so important to our world, right? It really was. It was frightening, for sure.
Well, so some lessons there. Mm-hmm. So what's Karen's pet peeve? One pet peeve. We all have more than one.
I know.
I can give you my pet peeves just for driving a car. I've got like 3 or 4.
Actually, my only one complaint about Colorado is that people don't know how to drive, but that's okay. I've lived in other places where people don't know how to drive. Honestly, I think I'd go back to my Midwestern roots and say that my pet peeve is people who are chronically late. Because as a Midwesterner, being late is a signal of disrespect, potential signal of disrespect.
Sure.
I've had to really tone that down, to be honest with you, because, there are some places where being late is just expected. Like if you're on time, you're early. So I've lived in enough places and traveled in enough places that I've learned to tone that down a little bit, but I have to tell you, I still get that little, irritation going in my head when somebody is like 15 minutes late for something. So,
Well, one of my best friends is from Haiti, and the culture is so different there. And when we were in
Right.
Dallas, Texas, I never forget this one time. We were supposed to meet, and he showed up 2 hours late,
Oh.
and wasn't even apologetic. And I just went in on him. And then he was like, "You Americans, you put time in front of people." I was helping somebody.
Right.
And so it was good to challenge myself to try to
Yes.
think from a different cultural lens, but it's just
Yes.
very, very difficult to do that
Yes.
when you're raised a particular way,
For sure. For
but I've
sure.
definitely seen that some cultures, yeah. If you could have dinner with anyone, past or present, who would you pick?
Oh, Michelle Obama.
You're not the first one to say her. She's a real star.
Oh, she is a real star. And I think, I have to pick a woman because I really do think
You'd be letting Smith down in
I
your
would
roots.
be letting my alma mater down, right? But also I think that she's so incredible, right? But I also think there's a depth to her that
Sure.
I have this sense that there's a depth to her that we haven't seen yet. It would only come out in a one-on-one conversation, right? And
Sure.
maybe with a nice glass of wine too, or two. So
Maybe someday, you never know.
Oh, that would
to
be
find some
amazing.
way to have her come as a speaker, but then that might take more endowment. Someone have to endow
I
a speaking
know.
fund.
It's funny because I've actually met Gloria Steinem and I found myself tongue-tied. Right.
Wow.
So I also hope that, because it's just, you're like,
Sure.
you're Gloria Steinem.
Right.
Like,
right.
I don't even know what to say. I feel like I'm not
Sure.
even worth being in your orbit. And you can tell I'm not a tongue-tied person, but
Sure.
I really just felt so in awe. So I would hope that I would go with a big dose of courage to ask Michelle Obama the really tough questions.
Awesome. And I always like to close with this. Best advice for parents, students, and college counselors.
Same advice for all three groups?
No, just like, what would be your advice for each of those groups?
Yeah. So I think for parents, taking many, many, many deep breaths is very vital in this process, right? And I think helping your applicant own the process, right? Parents don't intend to do this, but the message where the parent is overly involved sends that subtle and not so subtle idea that I don't believe you can handle this. And so I have to intervene to make sure that you handle this the way I think it should be handled. So I think everything that anyone can do to help parents feel more relaxed about this, right, is going to be really helpful. So I think deep breaths and try not to listen to Mark's podcast, but don't buy into the cocktail party conversation too much, right? So know your sources. For students, I think this can be a really tough process. And so I have enormous empathy for students. And I guess one piece of advice I would give is pull together a college list that, if it is your dream to get into an Ivy, it can go on the list, you can apply, but honor that this is a single digit process, regardless of which round, single digit admit rate, and sort of try to honor the things you can control and the things that you can't control. And at the end of the day, all of us doing this work want this to be a good outcome for them. So putting together a good list and being willing to listen to others about schools that aren't on your list, for instance, that might be schools you haven't heard of or schools that might be good to sort of try.
Sure.
College counselors.
Yeah.
It's an interesting group. I mean, I find them for the most part so dedicated to the work that they're doing on behalf of their students, right? I think there are some who could learn more about our side of the desk, just like the college admission people could learn more about what they do. So I think taking advantage of opportunities for sort of mutual collaboration and conversation. So
I'm going to probe that with you a little more, Karen. What are the things you find college counselors may not understand about, the admission side of the desk?
So I think there are some that are still still in shock about low admit rates, for instance, or still in shock about why particular decisions are made by institutions. I also think there are some that have ideas about the process, things like test optional or what needs to be said. Again, one of those. Counselors also fall prey to this student is one of the best that I've ever had in this many years, right?
Sure.
So I think sometimes it's wanting to have the best interest of the students at heart, but not being sure what to do. I'd rather have somebody call me and ask than to make an assumption about the Colorado college admission process, because I have license to say a fair bit about the process, right? And I would rather that be the case rather than sort of making assumptions about, who does or doesn't get in or which situation we would or wouldn't handle in a particular way. Like it's the partnership that I'm sort of looking for there.
Awesome. So listen, you'll have to tell us the website for Colorado College and any like social media that you'd really recommend students go to really learn, students, parents, counselors, anybody go to really get to know the school, any other source besides the website.
Yeah. So coloradocollege.edu, spelled out, all of it, all Colorado, all college, all lowercase. So
nice and easy. I love it.
Nice and easy. coloradocollege.edu. I think we have the usual suspects: Facebook, Insta, Twitter. I think those, I would say there's nothing sort of special in that space that I would particularly direct students to. I think as has been the case for all the colleges that I've worked at, those who have been students at CC, those who are alums of CC. So I would encourage all your listeners, regardless of, I hope they'll think about Colorado College, but whatever college that they look at, that they figure out who they might know or who might know someone who knows somebody. Because I think our students and our alums, for instance, are great sources of information about what an institution is. So I love those moments where I'm wearing my CC sweatshirt on a plane, or I'm carrying my CC bag, and someone knows something, right? So,
Sure.
So I would recommend, if you're buying a T-shirt at the bookstore during the visit, wear that T-shirt in the hopes of like finding somebody else who you didn't even know went to that particular college. So,
and I think in the case of CC, just because of your setting, it really feels like a place, if at all possible, try to get there.
Yeah, for sure.
Experiencing it.
Yes.
I'm sure just does something at a different level than any website or brochure.
Yeah. You can fly into Denver, stop in Littleton, check in on Mark's brother, and then make the rest of the trip down to Colorado Springs. We would love that.
Awesome. Karen, thank you so much. Thank you for being so generous with your time, and love your enthusiasm for admissions. And you model what you tell your applicants to do, which is be authentic. So I feel you were very authentic, and I really appreciate it. I know our listeners will as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks for the opportunity. Great to talk to you, Mark.
My pleasure.
Next episode on Monday, Mark gives the latest announcements in higher ed. The interview is part 3 of 3 with David Weiss, the Executive Director of Modern States. Dave explains where the funding for Modern States is coming from. Dave gives step-by-step detailed description of how you sign up all the way to how you get actual college credit for the CLEP courses. And Mark puts Dave Weiss on the hot seat.
All right, Dave, I can't end without at least doing one of our 2 famous phrases. College is not a prize to be won, but a match to be made.
Awesome. See you next week, my friend.
See you next week, everybody. And by the way, Dave is back.
I'm back.
So we have, there's 4 weeks a year where you have five Thursdays. And so we're going to mix it up. Sometimes it'll be Dave. Sometimes it'll be one of our other members. Sometimes it could be a guest admission officer or somebody else. So Dave's back. You get him 2 weeks in a row. See you next week, my friend.
No problem, my friend.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel, and to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.